My mother threw my sister a surprise birthday party and forgot to invite me. Interesting thing about being the easy daughter. People eventually confuse your silence with not needing love at all. 3 weeks later, my grandmother called and said 7 words that destroyed 11 years of lies. Come alone. Don't tell your mother. Interesting, honestly. Because some sentences arrive sounding small, until you realize they're carrying an entire family collapse inside them. My name is Susan Parker. 34 years old. Contracts attorney. Hartford, Connecticut. I bill in 6-minute increments. I alphabetize my spices. I run 3 miles before sunrise every morning because structure is easier than disappointment. And until last October, I genuinely believed my family loved me the best way they knew how. Quietly. Casually. Conveniently. I know now that self-sufficient was just the polite word they used for neglected. Interesting thing about emotionally overlooked daughters. We mistake survival skills for proof we were loved correctly. The party happened on a Saturday. I discovered it Tuesday morning at 10:14 while drinking burnt office coffee and reviewing a vendor agreement. Instagram story. Pink balloons. My parents' backyard. 22 smiling faces. And centered in the middle? My sister Vanessa wearing a tiara beside a massive white cake. Text overlay. Surprise! Vanessa turns 31. Interesting, honestly. Because there are moments where your body understands betrayal before your brain catches up. I zoomed in carefully. My father at the grill. My mother laughing. My aunts. My cousins. Even the neighbors. 22 people. And not one of them thought to ask where I was. I stared at the photo for maybe 30 seconds. Long enough to understand this wasn't accidental anymore. Then I took a screenshot. Not anger. Evidence. Huge difference. Interesting thing about lawyers. We start documenting emotionally painful things before admitting they hurt us. I called my mother that evening at exactly 7. She answered on the 4th ring. Hi, sweetheart. Warm voice. Easy voice. Like she hadn't excluded her oldest daughter from a family event 4 days earlier. Mom. Pause. Was there a birthday party for Vanessa on Saturday? Silence. Tiny silence. Massive answer. Then finally. Oh honey, it came together so fast. Interesting thing about liars. They always explain logistics before emotions. I leaned against my kitchen counter quietly. Madison posted photos from 3 weeks of planning. Another pause. Longer this time. We thought you were busy. There it was. The sentence. The family anthem. The thing they'd been telling themselves about me since I was 8 years old. Susan's fine. Susan's independent. Susan doesn't need much. Interesting, honestly. Because once a family labels one child low maintenance, they often start treating love like an optional service instead of a responsibility. I closed my eyes. Knowing my sister had a birthday isn't the same as being invited. My mother sighed softly. The exhausted sigh of someone inconvenienced by accountability. Please don't be dramatic. Dramatic. Interesting word from people who quietly erase you for years. I hung up first. Then I stood alone in my apartment kitchen staring at the IKEA table I assembled myself at 26 because nobody in my family helped me move. Interesting thing about self-sufficient daughters. We build entire lives around never asking twice. But honestly, that night felt different. Like something inside me had finally gotten tired of translating neglect into understanding. Still, I bought the gift. Of course I did. Interesting thing about emotionally abandoned children. We keep performing love long after realizing it's one-sided. There's a stationery store downtown Hartford that stays open until 8. I drove there in silence. Bought a cream-colored birthday card with gold branches pressed into the paper. $8. Cash. Then I went home and wrote carefully in my neat attorney handwriting. Vanessa, happy birthday. I hope this year brings you everything you want. Pause. With love, Susan. I ordered the expensive candle she'd been posting about for months too. Diptyque. Figuier scent. $180. Sent directly to her house. The address autofilled automatically because I'd bought her presents before. 12, Maple Lane. My grandfather's farmhouse. Interesting, honestly. Because back then, I still believed that house belonged to my mother fairly. I still believed safekeeping meant temporary. I still believed families corrected unfairness eventually once they noticed it. I know better now. Sunday lunch happened 5 days later. My mother invited me over to make up for everything. Her words. Not apology. Correction management. Huge difference. Vanessa's Lexus already sat in the driveway when I arrived. White SUV. New tires. Vanity plate frame reading. Blessed. Interesting, honestly. Because wealth looks holiest when nobody asks where it came from. My mother hugged me too long at the front door. Theatrical warmth. Vanessa hugged me next. You look exhausted, sis. There it was again. Their favorite version of me. Tired. Busy. Too overwhelmed to notice things. The roast was already on the table. My father carving. My mother passing green beans. Vanessa retelling every detail of the surprise party I wasn't invited to. And everybody acting like this counted as inclusion somehow. Interesting thing about dysfunctional families. They mistake proximity for care constantly. Halfway through lunch, I got up for water. Walked into the kitchen. And froze. Because sitting on the counter between a pizza coupon and unopened mail was the candle I bought Vanessa. Still sealed. Still untouched. And resting directly on top of it, the birthday card. Unopened. My handwriting visible across the front. Interesting, honestly. Because some heartbreaks are so small nobody else would notice them. Which somehow makes them worse. I stood there holding the water pitcher staring at proof that even my effort had become background noise in this family. Not hated. Not rejected. Just forgettable. That hurt more. I didn't say anything. Of course I didn't. I poured the water. Returned to the table. Finished lunch politely. Then drove home listening to NPR while my entire understanding of my family started cracking quietly beneath the surface. Interesting thing about denial. It survives longest inside calm people. 3 weeks later, my grandmother called at 7:14 on a Wednesday evening while pasta water boiled over on my stove. And said 7 words that changed everything. Come over alone. Don't tell your mother. I should probably tell you about my grandfather before I tell you what was inside the cedar box. Interesting thing about being truly loved once. It ruins your ability to fully accept being tolerated afterward. Theodore Whitaker lived in a white farmhouse on 3 acres in Litchfield County. Tomato garden. Loose porch railing. Physics teacher for 34 years. And the only person in my family who ever made me feel chosen without conditions attached. He called me Susie. Nobody else did. When I was 19, I started driving up every weekend from law school. We'd sit on the porch while he weeded tomatoes and I read estate law textbooks out loud, pretending I understood half of them. Interesting, honestly. Because sometimes older men recognize lonely girls before those girls recognize themselves. One summer evening, he looked at me over the rim of his coffee mug and said, Susie. Pause. The law is the only family that doesn't play favorites. At 21. I thought he was joking. At 34? I understood he'd been apologizing. My grandfather got pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2015. 3 months from diagnosis to hospice. Fast. Cruel. I drove to the farmhouse every weekend. Handled medications. Organized paperwork. Held his hand when morphine made him think Ronald Reagan was still president. Vanessa visited once. Mother's Day. 4 hours. Spent most of it crying in the kitchen while my mother asked me to bring her tissues. Interesting thing about caretakers. Families mistake our reliability for infinite emotional capacity. At the funeral, my mother leaned over beside the casket and whispered, "Help your sister pull herself together." Not, "How are you holding up?" Not, "He loved you so much." Just management. Always management. The farmhouse went to my mother afterward. At least temporarily, she explained. For safekeeping. I was 23. Grieving. Studying for the bar exam. And still naive enough to think mothers naturally told the truth about inheritance. Interesting, honestly. Because trust is easiest to exploit when someone's grieving. The call from my grandmother came 11 years later. Wednesday. 7:14 p.m. Pasta water boiling over on my stove. Come over alone. Don't tell your mother. No explanation. No small talk. Then she hung up. Interesting thing about old women. When they finally decide to tell the truth, they stop wasting words first. I left my apartment before sunrise the next morning. October sky still purple. Coffee in a travel mug beside me. 90-minute drive through back roads lined with maple trees turning red. And honestly, my brain rehearsed every possible disaster except the real one. Cancer. Stroke. Dementia. Maybe someone died. Maybe my mother had done something unforgivable. Interesting, honestly. Because deep down, I already knew this family was built on something unstable. I just hadn't found the paperwork yet. My grandmother opened the farmhouse door before I knocked. Wool cardigan. Gray hair pinned back tightly. Coffee already poured. And hands shaking slightly for the first time in my life. That terrified me immediately. Interesting thing about strong women. Their fear feels louder because you almost never see it. We sat at her kitchen table quietly. Percolator steaming beside the sink. Burnt toast smell lingering in the air. Then my grandmother stood up slowly. Walked into the dining room. And returned carrying a small cedar box. Dark wood. Brass corners. About the size of a hardcover novel. I hadn't seen it since I was 12. She placed it carefully between us. Then said, "Before you open it." Pause. "I need you to understand something." Interesting, honestly. Because every life-changing conversation begins with someone trying to soften impact first. Your grandfather gave me this 4 days before he died. My stomach tightened instantly. He told me to keep it hidden until I believed you were ready. I stared at the cedar box. Then at her. Why now? My grandmother looked directly at me. And for the first time in my entire life, I watched guilt overpower loyalty inside her face. Because I saw pictures from your sister's party. Pause. And I counted 22 people in your parents' backyard while my oldest granddaughter drank coffee alone. Interesting thing about witnesses. Eventually even quiet ones break under enough injustice. My grandmother slid the box closer. Open it. I lifted the lid carefully. 3 items inside. A yellow envelope addressed to me in my grandfather's handwriting. A brass key. And a folded legal document with a blue notary seal. Interesting, honestly. Because paper changes family stories faster than emotions ever do. I opened the legal document first. 3 pages. Formal language. Heavy cream paper. Header reading: First codicil to the last will and testament of Theodore J. Whitaker. My attorney brain kicked in immediately. Heartbeat slowing instead of speeding. Training. Always training. Then I read the paragraph that changed everything. I direct that the property located at 12 Maple Lane. Pause. And the trust account held at First National Bank. Another pause. Shall pass directly and irrevocably to my granddaughter Susan Vivian Parker. Interesting thing about shock. Sometimes it arrives completely silent. I read the sentence again. Then the next line. Free of any control or trusteeship by Carol Whitaker Parker. My mother. I looked up slowly. Grandma. What is this? A signed codicil. Pause. Your mother told probate court it never existed. Interesting, honestly. Because there are moments where betrayal becomes so large your brain physically struggles to fit around it. I unfolded the second page carefully. Trust fund balance. $185,000. The farmhouse deed. Supposed to transfer directly to me within 30 days of probate. Signed March 17, 2015. 3 months before my grandfather died. Witnessed. Notarized. Legal. Real. I set the papers down slowly. Then opened the yellow envelope. 3 handwritten pages in my grandfather's slanted blue ink. I recognized it instantly. Interesting thing about grief. You never forget the handwriting of people who loved you correctly. The letter started gently. Susie, if you're reading this, your grandmother finally decided you were ready. I kept reading. He wrote about being proud of me. About law school. About regretting that he couldn't tell me everything himself. Then halfway through page 2. I hit the sentence that split my understanding of my family permanently in half. He knew I would be passed over. I stopped breathing for a second honestly. Then kept reading. Your mother loves you the way she knows how. Pause. Which is less than you deserve. Interesting thing about validation. Sometimes it hurts more than cruelty because it confirms you weren't imagining anything. My grandfather continued. She tells herself your sister simply needed more. Pause. It is not kindness. It is a story. I lowered the pages slowly. The kitchen suddenly felt impossibly quiet. Just the ticking wall clock. Coffee cooling between us. And 11 years of family mythology collapsing in total silence. Why wasn't this filed? I asked carefully. My grandmother closed her eyes briefly. Your mother came to the farmhouse the morning after he died. Pause. She took a banker's box from his office. I already knew before she finished. Interesting, honestly. Because some truths arrive fully formed the second the door opens. She burned the unsigned draft. Pause. Then filed probate claiming there was no codicil. I stared at the papers. At my grandfather's signature. At my mother's name excluded intentionally from control. And suddenly, every single family moment from the last 11 years rearranged itself emotionally. Vanessa living rent-free in the farmhouse. The luxury SUV. The MBA tuition. The endless comments about how busy I was. Interesting thing about favoritism. It gets incredibly expensive once money enters the room. Then my grandmother slid the brass key across the table. Safe deposit box. Pause. Your grandfather made Gregory Hauerin keep originals downtown. Gregory Hauerin. Estate attorney. Dead since 2018. but apparently still protecting me from beyond the grave better than my own parents ever had. I wrapped my fingers around the brass key slowly. Cold metal. Heavy. Real. And honestly? That was the exact moment I stopped being the quiet daughter emotionally. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Legally, I didn't cry after reading the codicil. Interesting thing about lawyers. Rage usually arrives more organized than grief. My grandmother sat across from me quietly while morning light crawled across the farmhouse kitchen floor. The cedar box still open between us. My grandfather's letter beside my untouched coffee. And the brass key resting against my palm like proof that reality had finally become physical. Interesting honestly. Because emotional neglect feels debatable for years. Until paperwork enters the room. Then suddenly, everything has dates. Signatures. Dollar amounts. Intent. I read the codicil 3 more times. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I did. Perfectly. My grandfather had intentionally bypassed my mother. Intentionally protected me. And my mother buried it anyway. 11 years. Interesting thing about betrayal by parents. Your brain keeps searching for misunderstanding long after evidence eliminates it. My grandmother finally spoke again. She said you'd never challenge her. Pause. She called you the reasonable one. There it was. The family role. Not loved daughter. Convenient daughter. The one expected to absorb unfairness quietly because conflict made other people uncomfortable. Interesting honestly. Because families often reward the child least likely to expose them. I folded the codicil carefully. Then looked directly at my grandmother. Did Grandpa know Mom would do this? Silence. Huge silence. Then softly. He suspected. That hurt worst somehow. Not because my grandfather doubted me. Because he understood his own daughter too well. Interesting thing about old men near death. They stop romanticizing family dynamics completely. My grandmother reached for the letter gently. He made Gregory keep originals downtown because he was afraid Carol would destroy everything. Carol. Not Mom. Interesting honestly. Because once older women lose respect for their daughters emotionally, they stop using maternal names first. I stared out the kitchen window toward the tomato garden my grandfather planted every spring. Dead vines now. October frost. And suddenly, memories started rearranging themselves differently. Vanessa crying after college tuition bills. Paid instantly. Me taking out law school loans. Because you're independent, Susan. Vanessa moving into the farmhouse temporarily after her divorce. 7 years ago. Still there. My mother insisting Grandpa wanted the house kept in the family. Interesting thing about lies repeated long enough. They start sounding like tradition instead of theft. I asked the question next that lawyers always ask first. Who knew? My grandmother answered immediately. Your father. That landed harder than expected. Tiny sentence. Massive collapse. Because deep down, I'd still been protecting my father emotionally in my head somehow. Weak. Passive. Controlled by my mother. But not fully complicit. Interesting honestly. Because daughters spend years inventing softer versions of disappointing fathers. He signed the probate filings, my grandmother whispered. There it was. Legal participation. Not silence. Action. I closed my eyes briefly. Then opened them again, already calmer somehow. Not numb. Focused. Huge difference. Interesting thing about attorneys. Once emotions become evidence, we know exactly where to place them. I drove straight downtown afterward. Hartford cold. Gray sky. Traffic thick near Main Street. And every mile feeling like my entire childhood was being retranslated legally in real time. Howard and Pike still occupied the same sandstone building beside the courthouse. New nameplate now. Gregory dead. But the firm remained. Interesting, honestly. Because institutions survive longer than the people who build them. A junior associate greeted me in reception. 26 maybe. Nervous smile. Too young to understand she was about to witness generational collapse through probate law. I'm Susan Parker, I said calmly. I need access to Theodore Whitaker's archived estate files. The associate frowned politely. That estate closed years ago. I slid the brass key across the desk. And yet Gregory Howard kept originals. Interesting thing about lawyers. We recognize important keys immediately. Everything changed after that. Conference room. Partner involvement. Archived records pulled manually from basement storage. And at 1:42 p.m. an older attorney named Michael Riems placed a gray banker's box in front of me carefully. This belonged to Gregory, he said quietly. Pause. He left instructions. My pulse started pounding instantly. Instructions. Interesting, honestly. Because dead men only leave instructions when they expect living people to behave badly. Inside the box. Original estate documents. Certified copies. Trust transfer authorizations. And one sealed envelope marked. If Susan Parker appears personally. I opened it immediately. Single-page memo. Gregory's handwriting. Carol Parker attempted removal of codicil during probate. Pause. I refused release of originals without direct beneficiary appearance. Another pause. If discovered after estate closure, beneficiary should pursue civil fraud immediately. Interesting thing about ethical old lawyers. They become terrifyingly precise once they realize families are lying. Michael Riems sat across from me silently while I reviewed everything. Then finally asked. Did your mother ever disclose any of this? I almost laughed honestly. Not because anything felt funny. Because the question suddenly sounded absurd. No. Riems nodded slowly. Like he already understood the shape of the case completely. Then he said the sentence that officially transformed emotional betrayal into legal warfare. The statute clock likely starts from discovery of concealment. There it was. Not family conflict. Fraud. Asset concealment. Probate misconduct. Interesting, honestly. Because once lawyers rename your trauma correctly, everything changes emotionally. I left the office carrying copies of documents my mother spent 11 years hiding from me. And honestly, the strangest part wasn't rage anymore. It was clarity. Huge clarity. Every family dinner. Every Susan's just busy. Every subtle dismissal. Every financial imbalance. Suddenly made perfect mathematical sense. Vanessa wasn't simply favored emotionally. She was funded. By my inheritance. I stopped at a red light near Maple Avenue and finally allowed myself one dangerous thought. My mother never expected me to find the paperwork because she never believed I'd stop trying to keep peace long enough to investigate her. Interesting thing about underestimated daughters. Quiet women become terrifying once they finally decide to verify everything. That evening, my mother called. Cheerful voice. Artificially cheerful, honestly. Vanessa loved the candle, sweetheart. Interesting thing about guilty people. They continue performing normalcy until consequences physically enter the room. I looked down at the probate documents spread across my dining table. The farmhouse deed. Trust records. My grandfather's letter. Then answered calmly. Mom. Pause. Did Grandpa ever leave a codicil? Silence. Total silence. And honestly? That silence told me more truth than words ever could, Mom. Pause. Did Grandpa ever leave a codicil? Silence. Total silence. Interesting thing about guilty people. They stop sounding human for one split second when the lie finally reaches them. No breathing. No movement. Just empty space on the phone line where panic suddenly entered the room. Then my mother laughed softly. Too softly. What are you talking about? Interesting, honestly. Because innocent people ask questions. Liars buy time. I sat at my dining table surrounded by documents my mother buried for 11 years. Original codicil. Trust paperwork. Gregory Howard's memo. My grandfather's letter. And for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't emotionally negotiating reality to protect my family's image. I spoke to Grandma this morning. Another silence. Tiny silence. Massive collapse. Then immediately. She's confused lately. There it was. The strategy. Discredit the witness first. Interesting thing about manipulative families. They weaponize age, grief, hormones, stress. Anything that allows truth to sound unstable. I leaned back slowly in my chair. You filed probate claiming no codicil existed. My mother inhaled sharply. Finally. A real reaction. Not performance. Fear. Interesting, honestly. Because consequences become real the moment lawyers start using exact language. Susan. Pause. Your grandfather changed his mind before he died. I looked down at the notarized signature dated 3 months before his death. Then at Gregory Howard's memo documenting attempted concealment. And honestly? That was the moment I stopped hearing her as my mother emotionally. Now she sounded like opposing counsel. Do not lie to me again. Silence. Huge silence. Then suddenly. Anger. Fast. Explosive. You have no idea what this family sacrificed for you. Interesting thing about entitled parents. They always describe basic responsibilities like heroic charity once accountability appears. I laughed once quietly. Not cruelly. Just tired. For me? Pause. You used my inheritance to finance Vanessa's life. That landed directly. Because she didn't deny it. Not once. Instead. Your sister needed help. There it was. The family religion. Vanessa needed. Susan endured. Interesting, honestly. Because favoritism survives longest when one child learns to survive without asking. She had the divorce. She had debt. She was struggling emotionally. Every excuse arriving like rehearsed scripture. And suddenly, my entire childhood made perfect sense. Vanessa's private school tuition. And buried inside an archived email from 2016. The sentence that finally destroyed my mother's credibility completely. Susan never asks questions anyway. Interesting, honestly. Because arrogant people always document their own downfall eventually. The mediation hearing happened in February. Gray conference room. Cheap coffee. Rain hitting courthouse windows. And my mother sitting across from me looking older than I'd ever seen her. Not fragile. Exposed. Huge difference. Vanessa cried twice. My father barely spoke. And honestly? I spent most of the hearing studying him instead of the documents. Interesting thing about daughters. Part of us keeps waiting for our fathers to become brave at the last possible moment. Mine never did. The settlement finalized 3 weeks later. Full transfer of the farmhouse deed. Remaining trust balance plus interest. Financial restitution. Public correction of probate filings. And one private condition my mother fought hardest against. Vanessa had 90 days to vacate the property. Interesting, honestly. Because suddenly family home mattered deeply once she couldn't use it for free anymore. The moving trucks arrived in April. Cold morning. Mud everywhere from spring rain. I stood beside the porch holding coffee while strangers carried Vanessa's furniture out through the same doorway my grandfather used to wave from every Sunday afternoon. Vanessa refused to look at me. My mother cried openly. My father smoked cigarettes beside the driveway like silence could still protect him somehow. Interesting thing about consequences. They feel cruelest to people who spent years believing accountability would never arrive. After the trucks left, the farmhouse became quiet again. Real quiet. Not tense family quiet. Peaceful quiet. Huge difference. I spent the first night there alone. No television. No music. Just rain tapping softly against the roof while I unpacked books into the shelves my grandfather built by hand 40 years earlier. Then around midnight, I found his old coffee mug still sitting behind the cabinet above the stove. White ceramic. Tiny crack near the handle. World's okayest teacher. Interesting thing about grief. Sometimes healing arrives disguised as ordinary objects surviving longer than lies. I made coffee. Sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. And read my grandfather's letter again under the yellow kitchen light. Your mother loves you the way she knows how. Pause. Which is less than you deserve. For years, that sentence would have destroyed me. Now, it freed me. Because finally, I stopped measuring my worth against people emotionally incapable of giving what I needed. Interesting, honestly. Some daughters spend their whole lives trying to earn fairness from families already committed to imbalance. The lucky ones eventually stop asking permission to see the truth clearly. And honestly, that's when healing finally begins.